Okay, so you guys have been sending in a ton of stuff lately. And, a really consistent theme has been this whole idea of business expansion.
Yeah, it seems like everyone's thinking about how to grow, right?
For sure. But I have to say, going through all the material you sent, I mean, it's a lot to unpack.
It really is. Some of those articles were dense, man.
Totally. So we figured why not do a deep dive on this, help you guys extract the really important nuggets about business growth.
Basically, giving everyone a crash course in scaling up, minus the headache of reading all those long reports.
Exactly. So let's start simple. When we talk about business expansion, what are we really getting at?
Well, at its most basic, it's about a company getting bigger.
Okay, so bigger in what sense?
It could be a lot of things. Maybe they open more locations, reach a wider customer base, or even just start making more money.
So it's not just about, like, selling more of the same thing.
Not necessarily. Sometimes it means branching out, offering a whole new range of products or services.
Gotcha. Now, something that really jumped out from the material you guys sent in is that for a lot of businesses, expansion isn't just like a nice to have, it's kind of a must do.
It's true. You see this idea over and over again that growth is often seen as essential for long-term stability.
And I guess ultimately to succeed in the long run, right?
Definitely. And what's interesting is that there are a lot of different motivations driving this push for expansion.
Like what? Beyond just making more money, I mean.
Well, of course, profit is a huge factor. But the sources also highlight things like gaining a bigger slice of the market share, becoming a more powerful player in your industry.
I see. So it's about influence too.
Exactly. And sometimes expanding strategically can actually help you reduce costs in the long run.
Oh, right. Like by taking advantage of economies of scale. We should probably break that down a little more later on.
We'll definitely get into that. But it's a good example of how getting bigger isn't always just about revenue. It can also be about becoming more efficient.
Right. It's like playing the long game. And there are other benefits too, right? Like attracting a more diverse range of customers by expanding your offerings.
Absolutely. And tapping into new geographical markets, maybe even going international, that can be huge for growth.
So it seems like expansion is also about building resilience, making your business more adaptable and secure.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
And it ties into another crucial distinction that came up a lot in the material, the difference between organic and inorganic growth.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Break it down for us.
Well, think of organic growth as expanding from within. It's like using your own resources and capabilities to get bigger.
So no outside help, just building on what you already have.
Precisely. It's often a slower, more gradual process.
Makes sense. And probably less risky too, right?
Generally speaking, yes. It usually involves reinvesting profits back into the business or maybe taking out loans to fund that growth.
It's like planting a seed and nurturing it until it grows into a strong plant.
That's a perfect analogy. And you see a lot of companies taking this approach.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, one of the most straightforward organic strategies is opening new stores.
Makes sense. More locations equals more potential customers, right?
Exactly. Which, in theory, should lead to more sales. Plus, it gives your brand greater visibility in those new areas.
Right. You're reaching new communities, building awareness, maybe even tapping into different local economies.
That's right. And if you can increase your production or buying power because of those new stores.
You might even get better deals from your suppliers, those economies of scale we were talking about.
Exactly. But it's really important to weigh those benefits against the costs involved. Because opening a new store, it's not cheap.
Oh, yeah. You've got the property costs, fitting out the space, stocking the shelves.
And then there are the ongoing expenses too, like rent and staffing.
Oh, for sure. And let's not forget about marketing, getting the word out in a new community.
It's crucial. And your sources really emphasize that you need to do your market research, make sure there's actually demand in that area before you jump in.
Right. You don't want to be stuck with a fancy new store that nobody visits.
Exactly. And there's also the challenge of recruiting and training a whole new team.
Yeah, getting the right people in place is so important. And what if you expand too quickly and overextend yourself?
That's a real risk. If you try to grow too fast without proper planning and management, it can backfire.
Definitely a delicate balance. But plenty of companies have made this strategy work for them, right?
Oh, tons. I mean, think about companies like Dollar General and Dollar Tree.
Yeah.
They're constantly opening new locations.
Right. And they're not the only ones. Academy Sports plus Outdoors, Barnes& Noble, Costco, they all utilize brick-and-mortar expansion as a major part of their growth strategy.
And it's not just retail. Aldi in the grocery sector and Byron Burger, a restaurant chain in the UK, they've both grown significantly through physical expansion.
So opening new stores is definitely a proven path, but as you said, it comes with its own set of challenges.
Absolutely. Now, another major organic growth avenue is expanding online, specifically through e-commerce.
Ah, yes, the digital frontier. What are the main advantages there?
Well, the most obvious one is reach. You're not limited by physical location anymore. You could potentially reach customers all over the world.
Yeah, you're not just catering to the people who happen to live near your store. It's a global marketplace.
Exactly. And when you compare it to the costs of running a physical store, online operations can be significantly cheaper.
No rent to pay for a storefront, maybe fewer staff to manage.
Exactly. Plus, customers can browse and buy whenever they want, wherever they are.
24/7 access, pajamas optional. And from a business perspective, the sources talk about the benefits of personalized marketing online. You can really target specific customer groups.
Right. And let's not forget about the data. You can collect so much valuable information about customer behavior online.
Which can then be used to improve your strategies and offerings.
Absolutely. But going digital isn't all sunshine and roses. There are definitely challenges to consider. Well, you need a really robust distribution and delivery network. Customers expect their online orders to arrive quickly and efficiently.
Oh yeah, speedy delivery has become the norm, for sure.
Totally. And let's not forget about competition. The online marketplace is incredibly crowded.
Everyone's trying to get a piece of the pie.
Right. And then there are the security risks. You have to worry about data breaches, fraud, all sorts of digital threats.
Oh, for sure. Keeping customer information safe is paramount.
Absolutely. And something else to consider is that some customers just prefer being able to physically interact with the product before they buy it.
They want to see it, touch it, get a feel for it.
Exactly. That's something you just can't replicate online.
And building trust with customers in a digital environment, it can be tricky.
It's a different ballgame. You need to find ways to provide excellent customer service and create that sense of reliability even when there's no face-to-face interaction.
Makes sense. So despite those challenges, there are plenty of companies that have achieved massive success through e-commerce, right?
Absolutely. I mean, Amazon is the most obvious example. Their online marketplace has completely transformed the way we shop.
True, they're like the e-commerce behemoth.
Totally. And there are others, too. Several sources highlighted fashion retailers like ASOS, Boohoo, and Gymshark. They've all experienced huge international growth, primarily through their online platforms.
Interesting. So while online expansion has its challenges, it can be a very effective growth strategy, especially in today's digital world.
No doubt about it. Now, shifting gears a bit, let's talk about franchising.
Okay, so remind me, what exactly is franchising?
So basically, a company, the franchisor, allows an individual, the franchisee, to operate a business using their established model and brand.
Got it. So like think McDonald's or Subway.
Perfect examples. The franchise pays an initial fee and then ongoing royalties to the franchisor.
So what are the advantages of franchising for the company that owns the brand?
Well, it's a great way to expand quickly without having to shoulder all the financial burden yourself. The franchisees are putting up the capital for each new location.
So you can grow rapidly without having to invest a ton of your own money.
Exactly. Plus, each new franchise location adds to your brand's overall recognition and reach.
More locations, more visibility.
And because the franchisees are essentially running their own businesses, they tend to be highly motivated to succeed.
They've got skin in the game, so to speak.
Exactly. And often, the franchisee has a better understanding of the local market than the franchisor would.
They're on the ground, they know the community.
Right. Plus, since the franchisee is bearing a lot of the operational risk, it's generally a less risky proposition for the franchisor.
Sounds like a pretty sweet deal for the franchisor. But I imagine there are downsides too, right?
Of course.
Yeah.
One of the big ones is control. When you franchise, you're giving up some degree of control over how each location is run.
So even with established guidelines and training, there's always the chance that a franchisee might not do things exactly the way you want them done.
Right. And if a particular franchise location performs poorly or has some kind of public issue, it can reflect negatively on the entire brand.
Ouch. That's a risk you have to be prepared for.
Definitely. And while the franchisee is putting up the initial investment, the franchisor still needs to invest in training and ongoing support.
Providing resources, guidance, making sure things are running smoothly.
Exactly. That all takes time and money. And there's always the potential for disagreements or disputes between the franchisor and the franchisee.
conflicting interests, different interpretations of the agreement, that kind of thing.
Exactly. So franchising can be a very effective way to expand, but it's not without its complexities.
Definitely something to think through carefully. But clearly it's a model that works. I mean, just look at the fast food giants. McDonald's, Subway, KFC, Burger King, they've all used franchising to become global brands.
Exactly. And even smaller businesses can benefit. One source mentioned a company called TradeUp, a retail chain. They used franchising to grow quickly when they didn't have the capital to invest in new stores themselves.
Interesting. So franchising can be a viable option for businesses of all sizes.
It definitely can. Okay, now let's delve into another organic growth strategy, outsourcing.
Okay, so remind me, what exactly does outsourcing mean?
It's when a company hires an outside firm to handle specific tasks or functions.
Okay, so instead of doing everything in-house, you're bringing in specialists for certain jobs.
Exactly. Think about things like IT support, customer service, even manufacturing components of your product.
Got it. So what are the main benefits of doing this?
Well, it allows your company to focus on its core strengths, on what it does best. You're not trying to be a jack of all trades.
You're letting the experts handle the things they're good at.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And by bringing in specialized expertise, you can often improve efficiency and even the quality of those tasks.
And since you're not having to hire and train in-house staff for those functions, it can be a big cost saver.
Absolutely. Plus, outsourcing gives you more flexibility. You can scale your operations up or down as needed without having to worry about a large, fixed workforce.
So if demand suddenly spikes or drops, you can adjust more easily.
Right. But like any strategy, there are potential drawbacks. One of the big ones is loss of control.
You're relying on an external company to deliver, so there's always a risk that they might not meet your standards or expectations.
Exactly. And you have to worry about confidentiality and security, especially if you're sharing sensitive information with that outside firm.
That's a valid concern. And what about communication? I imagine that can be a challenge when you're working with a separate company.
It can be. You need to make sure there's clear communication and good coordination to avoid misunderstandings and delays.
Right. And there's always the possibility of unexpected costs, right?
Yes, unfortunately, outsourcing contracts can sometimes have hidden fees or additional charges that weren't initially apparent.
It's important to read the fine print. So what are some real-world examples of how companies are using outsourcing?
Well, a lot of tech startups, for example, outsource their IT support rather than building an entire IT department from scratch.
Smart.
And in healthcare, it's common to outsource things like payroll processing or medical billing.
Makes sense.
And for a lot of e-commerce businesses, customer service is a function that's often outsourced.
Especially if they're dealing with a high volume of inquiries.
Exactly. So outsourcing can be a valuable tool, but it's important to weigh the pros and cons carefully before jumping in.
Definitely. Okay, let's move on to another organic growth strategy that came up in the sources, selling more in existing markets.
Right. What's often referred to as market penetration.
Okay, so just to clarify, this means focusing on increasing sales of your current products to the customers you're already serving.
Exactly. You're not trying to break into new markets. You're trying to get a bigger piece of the pie you're already in.
Gotcha. So what are the main advantages of this approach?
Well, it's generally seen as less risky because you're operating in familiar territory. You already know your customers and the market dynamics.
You're building on what you've already established.
Right. And the goal, of course, is to increase sales and revenue. But it's not just about selling more. It's about strengthening those customer relationships.
Building loyalty so they keep coming back for more.
Exactly. And when you increase your sales volume, you can often take advantage of those economies of scale we were talking about earlier.
So you're becoming more efficient and potentially lowering your costs per unit.
Exactly. And by becoming the dominant player in your existing markets, you can really solidify your position in the industry.
Establishing yourself as the go-to brand.
Right. But there are some potential downsides to consider.
Like what?
Well, if the market you're in is already very competitive or saturated, it can be really tough to significantly increase your market share.
Everyone's fighting for the same customer.
Exactly. And sometimes companies resort to things like price cuts to try to gain an edge.
Which can lead to those dreaded price wars where everyone ends up losing.
Precisely. And once you've reached a certain level of market penetration, it can be hard to squeeze out much more growth.
Like you've tapped out the potential in that market.
Right. Plus, if you push too hard for market penetration, it can strain your resources.
You're putting a lot of pressure on your production, marketing, even your staff.
Exactly. And if you're not careful, trying to sell too much too quickly can actually dilute your brand.
Interesting, like you're overexposing yourself and potentially cheapening the brand image.
Right. So market penetration can be a very effective way to grow, but it's important to approach it strategically.
Fascinating. So, what are some companies that have used this approach successfully?
Well, a classic example is Coca-Cola. They're constantly running promotions and campaigns aimed at encouraging people to buy more of their existing drinks.
Makes sense. They're already a household name, so they're focusing on keeping people buying.
Right. And companies like Amazon and Apple, they've achieved incredibly high levels of market penetration within their respective industries.
They've really captured a huge chunk of their target markets. Okay, let's move on to another growth strategy that came up, selling existing products to new customers.
Right. What's often called market development.
Okay, so in this case, you're taking your current products and trying to find new groups of people to sell them to.
Exactly. This could mean expanding into new geographic regions or targeting different demographic groups.
So, like, if you're selling winter coats, you might try to expand into a region with a colder climate or start marketing them to a younger age group.
Perfect examples. The main advantage here is that you're opening up entirely new revenue streams.
You're reaching a whole new pool of potential customers.
Exactly. And it can help you diversify your customer base, which makes your business less reliant on any single market.
So, if one market takes a hit, you're not as vulnerable.
Right. And as you learn more about these new customer segments, you might even gain valuable insights that help you improve your existing products.
You're getting fresh perspectives and feedback.
Exactly. But of course, there are challenges to venturing into new markets.
I imagine it can be pretty tricky to figure out the nuances of a new customer base or a new region.
Definitely. Thorough market research is absolutely crucial. You need to understand the needs, preferences, even the cultural context of this new audience.
Right, what works in one market might not translate well to another.
Exactly. And there are usually higher upfront costs associated with market development.
Things like marketing and advertising to reach those new customers.
And setting up distribution channels in those new regions.
Right. And since you're entering uncharted territory, there's a higher risk of things not going as planned.
Definitely. It's a bolder move than simply trying to sell more in your existing markets.
So, what are some companies that have successfully used this market development strategy?
Well, Starbucks is a great example. They took their existing coffee shop model and expanded it globally, becoming a major player in numerous international markets.
They really took that coffee culture worldwide.
They did. Another example is Netflix. They started out as a DVD rental service in the US, and then they expanded internationally by adapting their content offerings to different regions and cultures.
So they're not just showing the same American-centric content everywhere, they're tailoring their offerings to local tastes.
Exactly. And Duolingo, the language learning app, is another interesting example. They started out targeting casual learners, but then expanded by creating specialized programs for professionals in fields like healthcare and business.
Smart move. They identified a new market with specific needs and tailored their products accordingly.
Exactly. So market development can be a powerful way to grow, but it requires careful planning and a willingness to adapt to new environments.
Definitely not a one-size-fits-all approach.
Oh,
Okay, let's talk about the last organic growth strategy on our list, creating new products for existing customers.
right. What's often referred to as product development.
So this means coming up with new or improved products or services to offer to your current customer base. Why is this so important?
Well, for one thing, it keeps things fresh and exciting. Customers can get bored if you're always offering the same old thing.
It's about keeping up with their evolving needs and tastes.
Exactly. And by giving them something new and innovative, you can entice them to spend more.
Increasing sales without having to go out and find entirely new customers.
Right. Plus, successful product development can really boost your company's position in the market.
It shows that you're innovative, that you're not just resting on your laurels.
Exactly. And those new products can contribute to brand expansion, opening up new avenues for growth.
You're not just stuck in your existing niche anymore.
Right. And if you get it right, those new products can potentially command higher profit margins.
Because they're more desirable or offer something unique.
Exactly. But product development isn't without its risks.
I imagine it can be quite expensive to develop and launch new products, especially if it involves research and development.
Oh, it absolutely can. And there's always the chance that the new product might flop.
It might not resonate with customers, or maybe the timing isn't right.
Exactly. And the product development process itself can be very complex and time-consuming.
It's not just coming up with an idea, it's designing, testing, refining, manufacturing, and then getting it to market.
Exactly. And to be successful in product development, you need to have a culture of innovation within your company.
People need to be encouraged to think creatively, to come up with new ideas, and to not be afraid to take risks.
Right. And there's another potential risk that's often overlooked: cannibalization.
Cannibalization. What's that?
It's when your new product ends up taking sales away from your existing products rather than attracting new customers or creating new demand.
So instead of growing the pie, you're just shifting the slices around.
Exactly. It's like shooting yourself in the foot.
Yeah.
But despite these challenges, product development is often essential for long-term success.
Because customers' needs and preferences are constantly changing, you need to keep innovating to stay relevant.
Exactly. And there are plenty of examples of companies that have thrived through product development. Think about Apple, for example. They're constantly releasing new versions of their devices and even branching out into entirely new product categories.
They started with computers, and now they've got phones, tablets, watches, even streaming services. They're never standing still.
Right. And Google, they started with their search engine, but they've expanded into so many other areas: email, maps, cloud storage, self-driving cars, you name it.
They're constantly pushing the boundaries.
They are. And Amazon, which began as an online bookstore, is now a massive retailer selling virtually everything under the sun. And they've also developed their own line of devices and services like the Kindle and Amazon Prime.
They're a prime example of how constant product development can fuel incredible growth.
Absolutely. So that wraps up our discussion of organic growth strategies. Now let's shift gears and talk about inorganic growth.
Okay, so remind me again, what's the key difference here?
Well, organic growth is all about expanding from within, using your own resources and capabilities. Inorganic growth, on the other hand, involves integrating with other existing businesses.
So instead of building everything yourself, you're joining forces with another company.
Exactly. It can be a much faster way to expand, but it often comes with a higher level of risk.
Because you're dealing with the complexities of merging two separate entities with their own cultures, systems, and ways of doing things.
Exactly. Now, there are several different forms of inorganic growth.
Okay, like what?
Well, the most common ones are mergers, takeovers, strategic alliances, and licensing agreements.
Got it. So let's start with mergers and takeovers. What's the difference between those two?
A merger is when two or more companies agree to combine their operations to form a completely new entity.
So they're essentially pooling their resources and becoming one big company.
Exactly. A takeover or acquisition is when one company buys another, gaining control of that company's assets and operations.
So it's like one company absorbing another.
Exactly. Now, both mergers and takeovers can offer significant benefits in terms of expansion.
Like what?
Well, for starters, they can provide rapid entry into new markets. Instead of having to build a presence from scratch, you're suddenly operating in those markets through the acquired company.
You're skipping the whole setup phase and hitting the ground running.
Right. And you're also gaining access to new technologies, resources, and expertise that you might not have had before.
It's like fast-tracking your development.
Exactly. Mergers and takeovers can also lead to a significant increase in market share.
Because you're combining the customer bases of two companies.
Right. And it can reduce competition since you're now operating as a larger, more powerful entity.
Makes sense. And what about economies of scale? Do those come into play here as well?
Absolutely. When you combine the operations of two companies, you can often achieve greater efficiencies and lower costs.
Because you're buying in bulk, streamlining processes, that kind of thing.
Right. Plus, mergers and takeovers can give you access to a wider range of intellectual property and expertise.
You're essentially tapping into the knowledge and skills of both companies.
Exactly. And it can allow you to diversify your portfolio of products or services, which can make your business more resilient to market fluctuations.
So lots of potential advantages. But I imagine there are also some big challenges to consider.
Oh, absolutely. Mergers and takeovers are very complex transactions, and they don't always go smoothly.
What are some of the things that can go wrong?
Well, one of the biggest challenges is integrating the cultures of two separate companies.
People are used to doing things in certain ways, and clashing work styles can lead to conflict and inefficiency.
Exactly. And often, mergers and takeovers result in job losses as the new combined entity looks for ways to streamline its operations.
Which can be really tough for the employees involved.
It definitely can.
Yeah.
And there's always the risk of overpaying for the company you're acquiring.
Getting caught up in the excitement of the deal and not properly assessing the true value.
Right. And sometimes, if the resulting organization becomes too large and complex, it can actually experience diseconomies of scale.
Wait, so getting bigger can sometimes be a bad thing.
It can. When the company becomes too big, it can become harder to manage, communication can break down, and costs can actually start to rise.
Interesting. So there's a sweet spot, a point where getting bigger is no longer beneficial.
Exactly. So mergers and takeovers can be a powerful way to grow, but they need to be approached strategically and with careful consideration.
Definitely not a decision to be taken lightly. Okay, can you give us some real-world examples of mergers and takeovers?
Sure. A few years ago, Facebook acquired Instagram and WhatsApp, two popular social media platforms. That was a major consolidation in the social media landscape.
Definitely. And those acquisitions gave Facebook a huge boost in terms of users and influence.
Exactly. Another example is Kraft Foods' acquisition of Cadbury's, a British confectionery company. That was a strategic move by Kraft to expand its product offerings, particularly in the UK market.
So they used an acquisition to diversify and strengthen their presence in a new market.
Right. And in the UK grocery sector, Morrisons, a supermarket chain, took over Safeway, another large chain. That significantly increased Morrison's store footprint.
So they used a takeover to gain market share and expand their physical presence.
Exactly. Vodafone, a mobile telecommunications company, acquired Mannesmann, a German company, in a massive deal. That solidified Vodafone's position as a leading player in the European market.
Wow, so that was a strategic acquisition to gain dominance in a key region.
Exactly. And in the entertainment industry, Disney's acquisition of Pixar, the animation studio, was a game changer. It brought together two powerhouses in animation and resulted in some incredibly successful films.
Definitely a landmark acquisition. Okay, so we've covered mergers and takeovers. What other inorganic growth strategies are there?
Another one that came up in the sources is diversification.
Okay, remind me what diversification means in this context.
It's when a company expands into new markets or industries that are different from its core business.
So instead of just sticking to what you know, you're branching out into something new.
Exactly. And this can happen organically through internal development or inorganically by acquiring or merging with a company that operates in a different sector.
Got it. So why would a company want to diversify?
Well, one of the main benefits is spreading risk.
So if one industry is struggling, your ventures in other industries can help to offset those losses.
Right. It's about not putting all your eggs in one basket.
Makes sense. And diversification can also open up new revenue streams.
Exactly. You're reaching new customer segments and potentially tapping into markets with higher growth potential.
So it's not just about mitigating risk, it's also about finding new opportunities for growth.
Exactly. And sometimes diversification can lead to unexpected synergies between your different businesses.
Synergies, what does that mean?
It means that the combined performance of your different businesses is greater than the sum of their individual parts. They somehow complement each other and create a stronger overall entity.
Interesting. So it's like 1 plus 1 equals 3.
Right. But diversification can also be risky, especially if you're venturing into completely unfamiliar territory.
I imagine it can be tough to succeed in an industry you don't have much experience in.
Definitely. And it usually requires a significant investment of resources.
Money, time, expertise.
Right. And there's a risk that diversification might divert resources away from your core business, which could weaken your position in your main market.
So it's important to strike a balance, not get too spread out.
Exactly. Can you think of any companies that have successfully diversified?
Well, Disney is a great example. They started out as an animation studio, but they've expanded into theme parks, live-action films, television, streaming services, you name it.
They're a true entertainment conglomerate now.
Exactly. And Amazon, they started with books, but now they're in retail, cloud computing, logistics, even grocery delivery.
They're constantly expanding into new areas.
And Apple, they started with computers, but now they're in phones, tablets, watches, music streaming, even financial services.
They've definitely diversified their offerings over the years. So diversification can be a successful strategy, but it requires careful planning and execution.
It's about finding the right balance between spreading risk and maintaining focus.
Exactly. Now, let's move on to another form of inorganic growth: strategic partnerships and alliances.
Okay, so this involves two or more companies working together, but they